This is the third part of the video looking at the title track on the album, and the end of this song sees me rising into the air and floating once again in the white light after having defeated the second entity. But in reality, something else happened first. After conquering that entity in the cupboard, I pushed my way through the back of the cupboard into a small tunnel, which led to a door and then into a larger tunnel. And there was an old man waiting in there, and he was dressed like Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars, and he congratulated me on my achievement, and then he nodded towards the exit when I asked him if my reward was waiting for me. You see, often when you set up a dream goal, you'll also set up a reward for yourself when you have achieved that goal. And in this case, I had promised myself a winged horse. So I exited the tunnel and found myself in the countryside, and off in the distance there was a large field behind a tall hedge, and I made my way over to it, excited at the prospect of flying off on my own Pegasus. When I got to the hedge, I struggled a bit to get over, but once I got myself into the field, there, standing in front of me in all its glory, was a sheep with wings. Not one to be put off easily, I mounted it, and, or should I say, I climbed on its back, and it ran around, struggling to take off, with my weight holding it down. And after a while, I eventually fell off, and fell backwards. And it's quite common, when you're waking up from a dream, to feel like you're falling, and you often land back in bed with a jolt. But in this case, I kept falling and falling backwards, and down, until I started floating, and once again, I found myself floating in the white light.
Surrounded by the white light, my memories stitched together, how I came to be here, I remember.
So we're back at the beginning of this song, floating in the white light, and I've now remembered how I got there. And I could feel myself lying in bed in some distant place, and I felt disconnected from that person, like that wasn't me lying there. And I had an overwhelming feeling that I could have just left that body behind and gone off and explored new dimensions and new dream realms. And I stayed in the white light for what seemed like an eternity, until I started to worry that maybe I had died. And with that worry, a million thoughts came flooding in, and I was pulled back to my bed with a thump.
You can leave that life behind, endless possibilities, exploring new realities.
The name of this song, which is of course the name of the album itself, is closely related to this white light phenomenon. And I'd like to just try and explain just exactly what the Antechamber of Being is. Now, it involves quantum physics, so bear with me on this one. Originally, the album was going to be called The Adventures of an Aeronaut being the official name for an explorer of the dream world. But after reading a book called The End of Time, I changed the name. In that book, the author, Julian Barber, explains how if we remove time from the picture, the universe starts to make a lot more sense. That by removing time quite literally from the equation, we come closer to a unification of the two current conflicting scientific theories, the Einstein's theory of relativity and quantum theory. We're now, of course, in Arjen Lucason's territory with that elusive theory of everything. And since we're talking quantum physics, I'm going to go back and explain the reason for the name of the first song, Decoherence, because it's closely related to the name of the album itself. Decoherence is a phenomenon in quantum physics where a quantum system collapses through observation from its superposition into a specific ordered state. Now, don't worry if that didn't make any sense, because I don't even understand what I just said. But in layman's terms, although I find that with quantum physics, layman's terms are often just as confusing. But anyway, in layman's terms, it means that something like a subatomic particle, for example, exists in a state of many possibilities until it is measured, at which point it becomes a specific quantum object. It takes on specific properties. It becomes one of the many possibilities. And I'm equally confounded and fascinated by that weirdness at the fundamental level of reality, as are scientists. But I think it's the perfect analogy for my journey in the first song. From the moment of conception, when I existed in a state of many possibilities, through the gradual process where my mental and physical properties were being defined or measured, if you like, to my first ever lucid dream at 6 years old, where I felt that I reached some kind of ordered state after learning to control my nightmares. And in his book, The End of Time, Julian Barber talks about this phenomenon on a much larger scale. He talks about the superposition of the entire universe, the state of many possibilities that every particle exists in before it comes into being. And it's a state outside of time and space. In other words, a place that is always there, behind the scenes of reality, if you like. And his name for that place is the Antechamber of Being, hence the name for the album, because that struck a chord with me, because I think of dreams as being a place outside of time and space, especially the dreams of white light. And they're a place also where many possibilities exist. And if you're lucid when you're there, you decide what the properties of that place will be. You bring it into being. You bring it into a specific ordered state, just like the scientist when he measures the particle. So, the end of the song, I've defeated the second entity. I've had my ordeal with the winged sheep. I've entered into the white light again and had the disconnected experience, and then I woke up. And not long after that, I think it was the next again night, I realised I had lost my fear of the dark. It had gone. Because even at that point, in my late 20s, I still had that silly fear where you'll switch the light on when you go to the toilet in the middle of the night, and when you come back, you'll jump the last 2 or 3 feet into bed just in case there's something lurking underneath there, ready to reach out and grab your ankles. But after defeating that entity, which was obviously that fear made manifest, my fear of irrational dark places was gone. That fear that I spoke about earlier, that comes from a time when we had a real reason to fear dark places, when there were things lurking in there that wanted to eat us. That fear had been eradicated through lucid dreaming. And I realised that it was connected with the fear of death, because after that whole experience, my perspective of that changed as well. Thanks for watching.
I have no hope.